Welcome to Common Sense. I'm Ed.
And I'm John. How are you guys?
Good. We're joined today by Carole Mahoney. Thrilled to have a guest with us today. Thanks for joining us, Carole.
Hey, thanks for asking me to come on. I've been looking forward to this because I think it'll be fun talking with the two of you.
Likewise.
Absolutely. And for those of you who don't know, Carole Mahoney is the founder of Unbound Growth, a scientific sales development firm. And Ed and I have known Carole forever, it seems like, but certainly since the early days of inbound marketing, when she actually worked as a marketer at a marketing agency and got them started with inbound marketing, and they became one of the first HubSpot partners.
Yeah.
So we've been collaborating ever since. And do you want to add anything to my intro, Carole?
Well, it seems like a decade ago when Pete Caputer at HubSpot started the HubSpot Partners Program, and we were all in a small conference room at UMass and then later at like a Marriott or something. So
yeah,
those first days felt like we were on the cutting edge of something big, great, and fantastic. And so it's,
absolutely.
I don't think a coincidence that now I'm kind of trying to move to what's the next cutting edge of things. We seem to be we're like those forefront kind of people, I think.
I agree. So why don't we start there with your evolution from marketing to sales and beyond? What got you to make that transition?
Well, when I started my marketing agency, and you've seen this happen, where in the early days of inbound, it was the inbound is all you need. You don't need to do anything else. It's going to take over and replace everything in the world. And I definitely had the Kool-Aid running through my veins. I was passing out red Solo cups to everyone of orange Kool-Aid. And what I found what was happening with my clients is that we were delivering more leads than they'd ever had in the entire company history. And what was happening, though, is that their salespeople were really struggling with how do we actually work with these inbound leads, these people who are on the internet. They know as much, if not more than we do about ourselves and our competition. And the tactics from the 80s and 90s, guess what? They don't really work. And when I started my agency, it was with the mission of helping companies to grow and create jobs. In other words, get more sales. Mm-hmm. And what I found was that inbound marketing alone was not enough. And if I was going to continue my mission in helping these small businesses to grow, I had to figure out how to bridge that gap between what marketing was doing and what sales was doing. And for a while, I made that play into that sales and marketing alignment, or that catchy word, smarketing, as we like to call it in the day. But I found that still even wasn't enough, because you could sit down with marketing and sales and you could put them together in the same room, but it really was something that needed to go a little bit deeper and to really get that alignment to happen. And that's what caused me to make that transition into sales, because one of the things that I realized is that one of the reasons I got into marketing was because I really hated sales. I hated that pushy, the aggressive, the manipulative sales tactics, and I wanted to make it completely obsolete. But what I found is that we still need salespeople today. It's just that the salespeople that are needed today aren't the pushy, aggressive salesperson. They're the helpful, the consultative, the putting someone else before themselves and their quota. And that's still rare today. So that's why I do what I do now.
Awesome. Ed, you want to follow up with a question?
Yeah, don't you find, though, Carole, that although those personality attributes that you described may not be successful in sales anymore, sometimes the activity level that people associate with somebody being pushy is still necessary, even though it's, I'm not articulating it very well, but you still got to follow up consistently and
right.
deliberately and repeatedly in order to get in touch with somebody to be helpful. And that process, that very explicit process of that kind of business development function, is what some people associate with the pushiness. And I think they conflate the activities with the personality or the approach.
Yeah, I think the thing that's important to understand is not that you're sitting back and waiting for customers to come to you and that you're doing whatever they ask of you, whether it's the right thing to do or not. People are busy. People are distracted. People have problems. And even though they want to solve those problems, maybe they don't know how to go about solving it. Maybe they don't understand how important or how much of an issue it actually is to them and their business. And that is the job and responsibility of a salesperson, is to take a problem, connect it to a solution, And for me, that's what makes the world a better place, because if we're connecting problems and solutions, we absolutely have to be proactive about it. We can't be the kind of person who just waits for someone to raise their hand and say help when we're walking by people on the street every day that need our help. So we do have to be proactive, but the difference is that it's not just checking in or, hey, give me an update on what the answer is to your proposal, or did you get swallowed by an alligator because I haven't heard from you kind of crap. It needs to be something that actually adds value, whether it's content, whether it's, hey, did you know, or how are you handling this thing that's coming up in your industry? Are you prepared for this next thing that's coming down the line? That's being proactive and reaching out to people. That's really just part of being helpful, in my opinion. It's how we do it, though, that comes off as pushy and aggressive when it doesn't add value.
So you're doing primarily coaching, is that correct? You're helping them get past that unknown stage. You know, what do I do first? What do I do next? You know, how do I even get that trust relationship? All those things, right?
Right. Well, I mean, with how many billions of dollars a year are spent in sales training, where it's either content that's delivered from one to many, or even micro content that's delivered on a platform, it's still answering only the question of, do they know what to do? Then comes the question of, can they actually do it? So, all right, I know that I need to be making this many calls a day, but do I know how to actually make those calls? What do I need to say, and how do I need to approach it? But then there's the third question, which is where coaching comes in of, will I actually do it? Do I have the mindset? Do I have the strengths? Do I have the confidence to be able to do the things that I know I need to do? And that's where I find coaching fills that gap between training and development. Is you can tell them what to do. There's no lack of telling salespeople what to do. We do it till we're blue in the face. But then the can they do it and will they do it is a place where training tends to fall down, because the can they do it is, do they have enough practice and experience and confidence? And then the will they do it is, do they have the mindset that's going to support them in actually executing it? Because we can't babysit people 24 hours a day. That's the will they do it.
And so do you find that there's value coaching the 80% of salespeople, or do you subscribe to the philosophy you find the 20% that are really the performers and you spend your time coaching them?
I subscribe to the philosophy that find those that are motivated and coachable, whether they're in the middle or the bottom or the top. Coach those people, because they're the ones that are going to actually apply the coaching. There are those people out there that they are not coachable. In other words, you can tell them what to do, but they're not actually going to own that and apply it, because they're not willing to grow and learn. But someone who's motivated and who's driven, I have seen and worked with salespeople who have been on plan, going to get fired in 2 months, and their biggest ambition was to not get fired. But it was enough to get them through to the point that they got off plan, and that win was then enough to get them to the point that now they're 250% breaking quota, number one in their company year after year.
And do you have a diagnostic to determine who's coachable?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So everything is, I subscribe to a scientific process, and a scientific process means it's unbiased observation. And to do that, I use an assessment tool in order to find out who's coachable, who's trainable, who's got something that they're motivated by, but they just need some direction in how to get there. And then what skills do they have, and what mindsets do they have that are going to support them? And that becomes a coaching plan. And the thing that's interesting about it is, like with training, a lot of times training is something that you don't really get a choice as to what the content is. You don't get a say into what you're being taught. And we tend to learn better as adults when we feel like we have a say in our own development plan. So doing an assessment and making it objective and giving salespeople some kind of say, and here's where I feel like I'm struggling the most in the day-to-day, countered by the experience of a coach. And you'll find that they're going to be much more bought in and driven. So the 80%, the 20%, I look for those that are coachable.
And so when you're talking to a sales manager who has a team that's really not performing, how do you approach that? How do you get down into the weeds about who needs the training and who doesn't?
So the first step we do is a comprehensive goal setting. In other words, finding out what is the thing for each person on the team that's going to drive them to do something. And quota is not a motivating goal. Getting to your quota is about as motivating as waking up in the morning and saying, I want to pay my taxes today. Like, I'm so excited for that. That's like what meeting quota is.
More like fear.
Yeah, it's the fear of, if I don't make my quota and if I don't pay my taxes, I'm going to get thrown in jail and I'm going to lose my job. So we really start by digging into what's personally meaningful to them? What is this job going to do for them, either on their career path or buying their first house, or proving to their parents that they can, do this on their own, or even proving to themselves that they can overcome their fear of sales, whatever it might be. And then taking that and then doing an evaluation to look and see through a questionnaire of who's coachable, who's trainable, what skills do they already possess, and then taking their motivating plan and their evaluation, and with that creating a gap of, all right, here's where you want to get, here's the skills that you have to get there, and then developing a plan with them on how you're going to, in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, start to improve on those specific pieces to reach that particular goal. Now, for a sales manager who's got a team that's not really performing, it's finding out, all right, who on the team is motivated, is coachable. And then as a team as a whole, even though each individual has different skills and strengths, typically what we'll find is, 75% of them struggle with asking a lot of questions. And so then we know we need to do some training specifically on this. And so maybe it's like a weekly lunch and learn. And then doing that training and using that in your coaching throughout the week in specific sales situations, specific calls, specific opportunities to see how is this coming up and how can we start asking more questions here. It's how you can take a whole entire team approach and break it down to an individual approach. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And that's much different from what a lot of agencies offer, which is what they call sales enablement, which is more like the structure behind sales, the use of software, the sort of the logistics of how things get handled, which is useful, but it doesn't really get the job done, right? Because you still have the tip of the spear is still the sales rep, and if they can't function, then you can't fill the pipeline and move them down.
Yeah.
What metrics do you rely on, though, Carole? I mean, I'm struck that most of the VPs of sales or GMs or whoever I talk to say, all you need to do is get us the leads. We've got salespeople. They know how to work with leads, and they know how to close them. And we kind of instinctively understand that's not the case. But what metrics do you use to highlight for them the fact that, in fact, their hot shots aren't as hot as they think they are?
So I am a big fan of using metrics that are behavioral based, which are leading metrics. So things that are so when we measure things like leads and number of leads closed or even meetings and things like that, these are things that have happened after the fact. Like we can't necessarily do something that's already happened in the past. However, if we're going to create these goals and these plans and these action plans for our reps, along with those need to be, what are the behavioral metrics and KPIs that we're going to measure that are going to tell us whether we're moving towards the outcome that we want. So for example, if one of the lagging metrics that you have is number of meetings booked, what does it take to book a meeting? How many calls, how many emails, and on those calls that you're doing, how many questions are being asked? How much time is the rep talking? How fast are they talking? All of those are behavioral metrics as well as prospecting metrics. How many people have they actually reached out to? Of which role? How many responses did they get? Are all things that would be leading indicators of whether or not they're going to get a meeting booked that week. So when you're looking at coaching, I'm looking specifically at here's the behaviors that we've identified that we want to change. Here's the reason why, which is the goal behind it. And here's how we're going to track and measure that. So I use call recording technology. I'll use CRM systems and things like that to determine which activities and behaviors. And then in coaching calls, we're talking specifically about those particular things so that it's not just looking at numbers on a chart, it's taking that and applying it to the context of a conversation.
Interesting. So when if I'm a sales manager and Ed and I have had a conversation about this and we're thinking about hiring a sales development rep, should that be a rookie out of business school or even regular school or maybe from some other industry? Or do you think it's better to move somebody into that role that's got a lot more experience?
That is a tough question to answer because, as every consultant will say, it depends. It depends on the stage of your company. It depends on who your buyer is. It depends on who your market is and how competitive it is. It also depends on the selling environment they're in, meaning the culture and the sales environment of your company. and what kind of tools and support that you have. So if you are a younger company, you don't have a lot of processes in place, you don't have a lot of support for that person yet, you're probably going to want to hire someone who's going to be more experienced and self-sufficient to be able to go into that role and hit the ground running. Versus if you're an organization that does have processes in place, does have a career path for a BDR, does have a clear idea of the profile and who they're going to be calling on, then you can get a clear idea of what kinds of skills that they're going to need to be able to develop, and objectively screen for the people that you can either develop or already have those skills, even if they're coming right out of college, or maybe they're still early enough in their career and they're trying to find what industry it is that they want to settle in. As long as you've got the support system for them, then you could do it either one of those ways, depending on those two answers.
Well, let's back up, though. The question before that is for a company that's only got a field sales force or maybe some indirect channel, should they have a BDR? I mean, what can they learn from best practices of companies that have had to really, under pressure, grow their business, like software companies with investors? And how can those lessons be applied to more traditional companies that have a very traditional sort of a sales structure?
So to answer that question, I've learned and want to find out things like if the market that they're in, if it's highly competitive, do they have any kind of presence in the market that they're trying to, because most people, when they want to hire a BDR team for a field team, it's because they're trying to expand in a market or test out a new market, where either they don't have a lot of presence yet or they're not as well known. So yes, you would probably want to get a BDR and again, depending on who it is that they're going to be calling into. Like, trying to cold call into IT professionals who have no idea who you are, have never heard of you before, is going to be pretty challenging. But if you have a BDR who they're not just doing cold calls, but maybe they're going to events or hosting events or conducting webinars and things like that, then maybe you'll have more of a likelihood or chance. Or if there's some kind of referrals and introductions that you can make there. So I think that it's going to depend on how quickly you want to break into a particular market, whether you want to wait until you've developed that market presence so that a BDR won't need to make as many calls, but then again, depending on who you're calling into.
That's interesting. What about in your training? You know, you're obviously helping a lot of these people out with building trust, you know, setting that expectations, all the kind of classic things you do up front in sales. What about closing? How do you teach people to close?
I love this question. I love it even more when salespeople come to me after they've been evaluated and then say, how have I been able to close anything? Because according to this, I suck at it. And
I'm raising my hand here. So.
Right. I think that the number of people in the world who are able to close are infinitely small.
Yeah. What
I see happen more often is that you see people who are so good at everything that comes before the close that the close happens naturally on its own. And so trying to come in with hard closing tactics when you haven't done all of those steps before, no matter how good of a closer you are, you're not going to be as successful as the person who's done the diligent work up to that point. So if I need to teach someone closing skills, I'm going to be making sure that they've covered all of the steps, asking questions in a layered way that buyers are going to be more likely to be able to build trust with them, reveal more information. And once you've built that trust, asking for the close is basically 3 simple questions. Do you believe that I understand everything that's going on? Do you believe that we have the solution to help? And do you want our help? Instead of using the close as the point where you try to convince them that you're the answer. Because if that's when you're waiting to do it, it's just not going to work, especially in the more complex the sale is and the more decision makers that you have, which is the average B2B sales today.
How important is content in this whole process? Because I know a lot of sales reps are excited about, you know, all the sales tools and CRM and things like that you can use. And I've heard people say—
You're talking to different salespeople than I am, John. I've never heard a salesperson tell me they're excited about.
All right. So I'm thinking about inbound sales.
Yeah.
The advanced digital sales people or whatever.
Yeah, your bias is showing just a little bit.
Yeah. But they still make the mistake of, instead of answering the question, yeah, let me send you a link to this, you know, ebook that we wrote about that, which is a killer, absolute killer. You know, you have to train some of these advanced people out of stuff like that.
I do a lot of coaching of inbound salespeople, and that is one of the things that I do find that they are that they default to. I almost said guilty of, but it's more of a they default to when someone asks them a question, yep, there's a link for that. I'll send it to you in the follow-up email. And by the time they get to the end of a 15 or 20-minute conversation, there's 20 different links that they've mentioned. And
none of which ever get read.
Yeah.
Exactly. Never get read, never get clicked on, never get opened. And I love it even more when they send them a PowerPoint presentation. Like, yeah, they're going to that bad boy at 20 to 40
or a
slides.
30-minute video.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sometimes it's almost like a slap them in the V8 kind of a moment when I pretend to be their buyer opening their email and reading it. And this is what I'm thinking in my head out loud to them right now. And I even asked them, like, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. You just asked a question. You spent your time to get on a call and you get told, yeah, there's a link for that I'll send you. Well, then what the hell do I need you for? Why don't I just go to the link? Why do I need to bother to talk to you? So a lot of times what I tell them is, yes, content is important. You need to include that, but tell them why the content's relevant to them based on the questions that you've asked and the answers that they've given. Or highlight, you know what, page 4 of this thing is exactly the thing that I talked about in our call if you want to read about it later. Or if you're going to send them a video, this piece that we talked about in our call at the 5-minute mark, you might find really interesting as another way to look at what we discussed. So use it as a means to continue to build the engagement after the call. Like I often say to salespeople, think of your meetings and your sales calls as like dropping a rock in the pond, and it creates a ripple effect. Before that call or meeting happens, there's things that you're going to want to do beforehand to get them engaged, asking them a question, maybe sending them a small snippet of information prior to the call, and then getting on the call and asking them more questions about themselves and their problem and what they think the solution is and why it's such a problem. And then during the call, mention, you know what, I have a article that I'm going to send to you on that. The reason that it's important is X, Y, Z, which you said before. And so it's almost like you're crafting custom content for them while they're on the call that they're going to be more likely to be engaged in later. And don't send them a litany of links. Send them 1 or 2 that's relevant to the conversation, that helps to continue that ripple effect after the call to get ready to build the anticipation and momentum for the next one. It's like dating. Like you don't go out on a blind date and then never talk to them again. You send them a link with a bunch of information. That's not going to get you anywhere.
Right. Yeah, and later on too, when you kind of send them an email, maybe 3 or 4 days later. Hey, I was thinking about you, and thought about our conversation. We were talking about this, and I just saw this in the New York Times today, or something like that. And you're sharing something relevant to what you were talking about. It's valued every time.
It kills me because I talk to salespeople and they're fretting over what would I say, and maybe if I send them this thing, and they agonize over it for minutes and hours and hours. And I'm like, so why were you thinking of them? Well, because of this. And why is this article relevant? Well, because of that. I'm like, so just say what you're thinking. Like that's what transparency is all about. Like rather than trying to think of this ultimately perfect thing to say, think of the simple thing to say, the transparent thing to say, and that's usually the valuable thing to say.
Totally.
But didn't field salespeople 15 years ago have an easier time having those kinds of conversations? Didn't they do more prospecting? You said that you've recently transitioned into the sales training area out of marketing. And so maybe you don't have the background, kind of the comparative experience, mm-hmm. But it feels to me like sales people have changed and they're not as tough. They're not as resilient. They're not as determined to prospect as they used to be.
Because they're not in the position of power anymore. Before they held all of the information, and now they don't hold all of the information. They're actually almost at the mercy of the buyer who knows how much more information, and depending who they're talking to. But then also at the same time, salespeople today are just as overwhelmed as buyers are. Like I talk to salespeople every day who are going into companies and trying to figure out the persona, the messaging, where they're going to find them, and all of these particular things. Even in more developed companies, they're still like, I need to start performing and I'm still trying to learn. And it's the same thing that their buyers are going through. So I don't know if they have it easier, so to speak, because again, I've only been in sales for the past decade or so, which I sometimes think of as an advantage because I don't have the past history to bias me. I only have the present and moving forward. But right. I think no matter where you look, you're going to find each different each one has its challenges and its opportunities. I could look at all of the challenges that we have in sales today, but I still see them as opportunities. Yes, it's harder to get people's attention, but it's also easier to know things about people to find out what might be interesting and relevant to them.
Right.
You know, instead of 7 times to repeat yourself, now it's 9 times that you have to do that. We have so many more channels in which to do that in. So challenges, opportunities on either end as I see it.
What about at the end of the day when you close the sale? It seems like the new challenge is what to do next, you know, and no one's teaching salespeople how to become really customer success people. And
Yeah.
it's a big buzzword now, but it seems like nobody knows what the hell to do about it.
All right, so I'm going to give you guys I don't even know how many thousands of dollars it might be worth, but I actually had a client recently that I've done.
Checks in the mail, Carol.
Yeah, right, exactly. I have a client that I've been working with that I introduced this strategy to, and they contacted me about a month ago asking for a referral to a realtor so that they could buy a second home. I'm like, you're telling me that this strategy is that successful? You're ready to go buy a second home now? So here it is. When you're selling something, you're making a promise. You, the person, I'm promising you that the things that you've told me that are a problem, this solution that my company has or that I have is going to solve those problems. And I don't know about you, but when I make a promise to someone, I like to know that that promise actually is being fulfilled. So as a salesperson, you don't necessarily need to be the support person or the customer service person, but if you're not keeping in touch with the customers that you've sold on a regular basis, you've just become that typical salesperson that sells them and then you never hear from them again, like another one-night stand in the buyer's mind. He just wanted to sell me. Now they don't really care what happens and I'll never hear from them again until it's time for me to buy something else. Right. If you want to differentiate yourself as a salesperson, try this. Sell someone, and every month, every week, depending on how many customers you have and what tier, you know, if they're an A customer, a B customer, a C customer, and find out from them. Did the promise that I made get fulfilled? Did the implementation happen the way that you expected it to? Are you getting the results that you were expecting to when you expected to get them? And when they're happy and they're bragging, that's when you can say, so who else have you bragged to? Do you think that we would get along, and how would you like to introduce us? Because if you're keeping in touch and on top of how happy and satisfied your customer is, then when it comes time to ask for an introduction or referral, it's more natural. It's not the, oh, I only hear from you when you want something kind of a strategy. I've seen salespeople, inbound salespeople do this, and that's how they got to 150 to 200, 250% of quota. Because the referral system that they get as a result comes in over and over again. Because this is the thing that kills me. Inbound, outbound, partner channel sales, webinars, you name the channel. But referrals will still cost less, have higher values, and close quicker than any other means of getting a customer. So if your whole sales process isn't designed with the objective of getting more referrals on a consistent basis, then you're just spinning your wheels over and over again. Your cost of acquisition is going to keep going up, and it's going to get harder and harder to be competitive unless you get a lot of referrals.
Couldn't agree more. I think we've beaten that horse to death on this show quite a few times. So
good. Well, I'm going to beat it a few more times, a couple of kicks.
So what's new for 2019? What are you working on?
So for 2019, I am working on creating more of a artificial intelligence enabled coaching platform.
Oh my God.
I know. Isn't it sound cool? What it really is it's a way, because one of the biggest complaints that I hear from managers, I don't have enough time to coach. When I tell sales managers that 50% of their time should be spent in coaching, it was like, you know, I just walked over their grandmother's grave or something. Like they get this look on their face like, are you crazy? And so what I'm looking at is things like, how do we integrate call recording technology? How do we use artificial intelligence to start analyzing some of those calls and coming up with coaching recommendations? And not just call recording, but email, because email is the thing that helps with that ripple effect that we were talking about to continue. So what you're saying and how you're saying it in email is a big part of the sales conversation. So a platform that incorporates that, as well as taking the goal setting and the evaluation pieces and using a sort of an online platform where someone can access that 24/7 a day, whether they're in New Zealand or Australia or in Canada or in Boston, can go through those steps whenever they want and then be able to apply their learning in sort of micro learning segments where there's video that can help them. Here's how you ask this question of this decision maker kinds of things. So it's really brought down to the, how do I apply this to my everyday job? So that we can take coaching and we can make it scalable, because I still see coaching in the one-to-one coaching as where the magic happens. But at the same time, it's so time intensive that if we can use technology for that time that we have to make it more effective, then I think we can make coaching more scalable in larger organizations and even for smaller businesses as well. And
one of the things that I've always been fascinated by is the possibility to use marketing automation, infer from the prospect's background and activities the problem they have, the way they're looking at it, what they're thinking about as a possible solution. And then as you send the lead to the salesperson, using that opportunity to provide contextually, here's some questions we think you ought to ask. Here's the content we have that we think is good enablement content based on all of this. So almost proactively doing the coaching, which would, perhaps be less efficient than seeing where the specific problem is and addressing it. But have you seen clients that have tried to use that sort of an approach?
I have seen clients that have tried to use that sort of approach, but not very well. And the reason is what happens is that sometimes it tends salespeople to start shutting off their brains. Mm-hmm. When every single step is laid out for them and suggested, they take that as what they should do, and they don't think. They don't take the 3 minutes before a call to look up something about them on LinkedIn that they can make this a more personalized call. Right. And so what happens is every call sounds exactly the same, and not in a good way. It sounds exactly the same, like you could be talking to this person or this person, and you almost hear it in the salesperson's voice. Like they sound like the robot. Okay, here's the next question on my list. Hello, Mr. Prospect. Tell me, what are your goals today? And it's the same thing. I can't, and so let me contextualize though and preface it by saying, if you have younger salespeople who are brand new, never done this before, and they're just starting to get on the phone, those prompts can certainly help. But it can be dangerous when that's the only thing that they pay attention to and they're not engaging their brain. Right. And they're not making that human connection with the person because they're relying on this.
Yeah,
so it's almost like
might be more valuable just as knowledge that you have in your head before you make that call. So you're thinking, you're listening for things.
Yeah, and that's why in coaching, doing role playing and the thing when I say role playing, I actually call it practice, because it's more about not role playing a hypothetical or theoretical conversation, but actually practice a conversation you're having in an hour or tomorrow or next week, and practicing it more than once. That I would subscribe to more than here's the questions that you need to ask, and they don't have someone to bounce that off of. Because unfortunately, you ask someone a question, they don't always answer it the way that you wanted them to. Like me.
You might not have
what I would answer, and that hasn't happened. So
you might not have the right person on the call too. You got to think about that. So they might not even know what the revenue situation is. So you want to make sure you think about those questions before you ask them.
Yeah.
All right, John, we probably got time for like one or two more questions, so you better make these count.
No, go for it, Ed. You.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I think the things that I'm focused most on are this breakdown that I see in salespeople prospecting, where they used to and they don't now in so many cases, and how that translates into evolving the sales model. I mean, I speak mostly to traditional industrial manufacturing companies, and I think there's a lot of insight that they can get from talking to software companies that are under pressure from investors that they have to develop their sales. The other piece that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about is intent data, and how buyer intent data, if you've got the right kind of data, can really inform that prospecting activity. Have you seen any interesting applications of intent data that have really demonstrably impacted the success rate of the prospecting?
So for me, what I see most salespeople using is like something like LinkedIn Sales Navigator. They're following certain companies, they're following certain people. They've set it up so that if particular things happen, things like Google Alerts. I have also seen some others that have used some technologies, and I think Outreach might do this, and a couple of others where you can follow certain information data on people. I don't know that I know of any really intent analysis data as it's been worded that way, but for salespeople, what I've noticed is when we go through and we create their plan, we've decided, all right, these are the people that you're going after, then it's that next question of, all right, where are they?
Right.
What's interesting to them? How are we going to get in front of them? And it's everything and anything that we can do. It's events, it's cold calling, it's social selling, it's introductions and referrals, it's cold emails, webinars, whatever means available to us. And so, I call it trigger data. Like, what are some of the trigger things that have happened that would indicate that there's either something going on or a problem going on that they can then use to find more about. So I'd be curious to hear if you've got whatever you're thinking of using that might be interesting as well. But most of the time, it's Google Alerts or Sales Navigator that I find most salespeople using.
Got it.
Well, I think we are running out of time. You got to go make some money, I guess. So we appreciate that. But we'd like to thank Carole for stopping by and dropping so much knowledge on us. Thank you, Carole.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's great to chat, Carole. Thank you.
Yeah, if you'd like to contact Carole, you can find her at unboundgrowth.com and her blog there, where you can find tons of great interviews and webinars and just generally good advice on sales development and other hot topics. And don't forget about our book, Common Sense Revenue Growth. You can find that on Amazon, and check out our podcast at riptidepress.com. So thanks.
And I'll point out, of course, Carole was using that Patriots mug proudly, and so another Pats Nation.
See you in the playoffs. Thanks for joining us today. I'm John.
And I'm Ed, and we're joined by Carole Mahoney. Thank you, Carole.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.